Want to widen your career options? Consider the Master of Science in Business degree at Mays Business School. MS Business is an intensive one-year master's degree for non-business majors that are graduating this year or have recently graduated. Our program is highlighted by practical, experiential learning, running a real business with real money, and an international trip abroad. Events will be hosted where you can learn more. Check our website for more information at mays.tamu.edu.
Howdy, welcome to Mays MasterCast. I'm Shannon Deere, the Assistant Dean for Graduate Programs, here with your remarkable host, Ben Wiggins.
Hey, Shannon.
Hi, Ben. How are you?
It's a beautiful day in Aggieland.
We have on the show today Tyson Voelkel, who is the president of the Texas A&M Foundation. He's going to share some emotional stories. He's had many challenges in life that he'll talk about on the show. Mm-hmm. And really what I've found from a couple of interactions with Tyson in a different context as well as on this show is he shares those stories because they have an impact on other people's lives. And that if he can take some of the challenges he's faced, some of the tragedy he's faced, and have a positive impact on someone else, that honors those tragedies he's experienced. There's a Bible verse that I really like. I may have read this before, but it talks about how challenges produce perseverance, perseverance character, and character hope. And hope does not put us to shame. And I think, to me, that's what I think of when I think of many of Tyson's stories, that his perseverance has built so much character and so much hope. And I'm so grateful that he shares that character with us on the show and with Texas A&M every day in his current role.
I think of the phrase, still waters run deep, and Tyson is not that at all. His waters are not still in many ways. He's doing so many things. As he'll mention on the show, he stays up late, he gets up early, he works a lot, he does a lot with the community, does a lot with his family. He's clearly a man of much energy, but you can feel the layers. Talking with him was almost like, this analogy almost feels a little disrespectful, but it was almost like the layers of an onion, like peeling an onion and just seeing, again, no disrespect with that analogy, but there were just so many layers to get into and to see the life experience and the tragedy, as you said, and the deep decisions that have gone into making this man the person that he is. It is a life fully lived.
And much happiness and hope and prosperity in his life as well, in addition to some of the tragedy that he has experienced. We lost a really close family friend last week.
Yeah, I'm sorry for your loss.
Thank you. And we were at the funeral, and one of the things that came up in talking about his life, he had a profound impact on many people. He was someone who lived a life of selfless service. His name is Greg Lucky Cox. We all called him Lucky. We thought that was his middle name. It's actually Lynn. I feel a little duped, but I'm going to let it slide. But we all called him Lucky. And one of the things that came up at the funeral was basically on his deathbed, he asked, was it enough? And it broke me hearing that he, of all people, would ask that question because he's had such a profound impact. He's lived a life of selfless service in his job, in his roles in the community, in his roles in the church, in my life, in my parents' lives, in my sister's life, and so many people's lives. And he still asked, was it enough?
Schindler's List. If I could have done a little bit more, was that the tone of it?
Someone said, you've done so many great things in your life, and he still asked, but what were the great things that I did enough?
Who was he?
Was
he asking himself? Was he asking someone else?
A minister our youth minister growing up. And I don't know that that's the only person he asked, but that was a question that he asked him. And when I heard much of Tyson's story, that was somewhat the theme I heard, that he's trying to live a life that is enough. And I don't know that we ever could. It seems like a goal that continues to move. What is enough? How do you define it? And of course, I can look at Lucky's life and say that was enough. You did enough. but I also can understand there's always more you can do. And so it could feel like a futile goal. When I heard Tyson's story, I thought of that, is it enough? And Tyson's life certainly seems like enough.
To me, the answer to that question, in my opinion, some may disagree, lies in the intent with which the life was lived. And it's actually not in the results, because it's so hard to evaluate results across the entire course of a life and look at, for example, this person did this one amazing thing, and then the rest of their life was perhaps pretty ordinary. Well, how do you compare that to someone who did a lot of good stuff, but never did something truly, truly profound and incredible? Well, it really comes back to what Tyson touched on, which is, are you thinking in terms of how you can have an impact on others? And are you doing your best to leave the world a better place than you found it? And are you thinking of what your legacy will be? Do your thoughts turn sometimes to what your legacy will be and how you can lift those up who haven't had the same privilege that you've had, and raise the profile of truth in your community, and honesty in your community, and justice and selfless service, and a whole host of other things? And if you have lived your life with those things in mind, then you can answer the question for yourself, I walked the path I was given. And that's all any of us can really do. You can say, I tried to realize my destiny, and to realize it in the best way possible. And if someone says, well, you didn't meet this absolute standard in some sense, then you can say, I'm sorry, I did my best.
Before we transition into the episode, I want to say a little bit more about Tyson and why he is important to the world.
Yes.
He served as a U.S. Army infantry officer for 12 years. He had various leadership roles throughout peacetime and in combat. He also, and again, that follows the theme of selfless service and his commitment to serve our country. He is important to Mays because he is the president of the Texas A&M Foundation, which results in a lot of the donations that we receive at Mays, and which fuel the research and scholarship students here at Mays as well, which are all really important to our mission and organization, and giving back to the state and the world as well. Tyson, in the episode, talks about perspective and how having different perspectives is so important, which is something I think all of us can learn in business and in broader contexts. He talks about being raised by a mother who is Islamic and a father who is Christian, and how that governed the conversations at the dinner table and shaped his perspectives and views on the world, which are all really interesting. So we know you will enjoy the episode.
We have a real treat for you today. We welcome Tyson Voelkel to the show. How are you?
Good morning. I'm glad to be here.
How was your Thanksgiving?
It was wonderful. Took a trip with my family to New York City, and so traveling with
I hear
a
that
5-year-old.
place is nice.
It was nice, and we were hosting a Traveling Aggies trip, so it was a lot of fun. I learned a lot, and it was wonderful being in New York again.
You said traveling with a 5-year-old.
Yes, traveling with our two daughters, Eliana, who's 12, and she turned 13 on Sunday, and my wife, Christy, and Violet, who's 5 years old. So it's a good mix.
Let's start with our icebreaker question. What is your favorite superpower?
I think it would be the ability to go back in time.
Okay. What would you do with that? Would you Biff Tannen the sports gambling, or what would you do?
I'd probably go back and try to impact history in some different ways. Try to prevent some horrible things that happened in human history.
You would change the past.
I would try to change the
Dangerous
past.
ground. What if one event? What would you pick?
Oh my gosh, I would find any way possible to prevent Hitler from taking power.
That's probably that's a good one. Have you read 11/22/63 by Stephen King?
I haven't.
It's a great book, and I'm spoiler alert for any of our listeners who are reading that book or planning to read it. The protagonist of the story goes back to prevent the Kennedy assassination and succeeds in doing so. And he comes back to the current time to find out that the world is falling apart. I love Stephen King. He's my favorite novelist, but it's kind of the ultimate change the past cautionary tale that doesn't involve like running into your own family or whatever, that sort of thing.
Yeah. So now that I'm thinking about this superpower question, I'm not so sure I would want that superpower.
Oh.
I'm not so sure anybody should have that superpower.
Okay.
Yeah. Because at the end of the day, we are where we are and we are who we are because of what's happened in the past, both the good, the bad, the ugly.
True.
And it's how we choose to respond to it. And so trying to change some of the horrific things that happened in history, although it sounds good, I think you don't know what domino effect you're going to create alternatively. So I need a different superpower.
Okay.
But, I'm kind of weird this way. So I've never played solitary. I haven't read a novel in probably 20 years. Everything I read is nonfiction. So I need to think about that superpower question. Like if there was a superpower to be an awesome dad, that would be the superpower
I love that one
that
too.
I need.
You said you read a lot of nonfiction. Who are your favorite writers, or who's your favorite writer?
I mean, when you think about it, perspective is what creates your ability to make decisions.
Sure.
And so if you were to walk into my home and look at my library, there's a wide breadth of different books and authors. I study leadership and recently started reading more biographies. And that's been interesting because if you look at people's lives, everybody has ups and downs. There's no straight path to just about anything. Everybody has a winding road, if you will, and multiple paths. And it's all about what decisions did you make and where are you today because of those decisions. But as far as authors go, one of my favorites, and it's a constant reference for me, is Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. It's absolutely remarkable. And every time I read it, I learn something new about myself and humanity. And if you're not familiar with it, he was in a German concentration camp and used his time in the concentration camp to better understand the human condition. And it's really a powerful read. My wife and I have just started doing more recently is I'll read out loud at night and share different passages and pages, with her. We have different nighttime habits. So my wife, Christy, likes to unplug and she'll put on something on TV, watch the news a little bit, and then maybe a television show of some kind. And I have 5 or 6 books on my nightstand, and whichever book I feel like, I just pick up and start reading.
I get the sense that I'm hearing like faith coming through in this. You said the word passages, and that suggests like possibly Bible passages as well. It's a word you hear a lot in reference to the Bible. Do you read the Bible a lot?
We do, but not as much as people would think. When you look at faith and how faith plays a role, faith is based on the word trust, right? You trust that there is something else, there is somewhere else.
Sure.
Things happen for a reason. There's a plan. We're not in charge of that plan.
Right.
Your life is based on a series of events and things that sometimes happen to you, but then also things that you encourage to happen.
Right.
And faith does play a big role in that. And faith has played a huge role in my life ever since a child and, to this day. But reading the Bible at night isn't one of the habits that we've got. For me, that's my quiet time in the morning. So I get up really early and I'll read a passage or two. And then I've started trying to meditate a little bit more and just think about thinking metacognitively, like, okay, what do I have today? What's the most important thing for today that needs to be done? And how do I get my mind right for that? And faith plays a role with that. And then also solitude and quiet helps with that to calm me. Because if you think about your day, it is absolutely filled from the moment you're awake to the moment you're going to bed. You get to choose quite often what you're going to receive and listen to and see and respond to. And sometimes you can't. You don't have a choice. Sometimes things are thrust upon you that you've got to take action on and respond to. Understanding what needs responses and what doesn't immediately is a big part of sort of that quiet time for me in the morning. Because if I tried to respond to everything, there's not enough time in the day. And when everything's a priority or everything's important, nothing's important, right? Sure. So that for me, the Bible is more of a morning. It's quiet. I've got my cup of coffee. I haven't worked out yet, and I'm just sitting there thinking. And even there, I don't go chapter and verse. I just open it up to whatever page opens up and I read it. And if it's intriguing or interesting, I'll read more. And if I get it or I've read it before, then good. And I sit and think about it for a few minutes.
You talked about meditation, and I've heard a lot about meditation in the course of forming and changing habits recently. Any thoughts on habit as it pertains to meditation?
So there's lots of studies out there about how to build good habits.
Sure.
It's hard to know what habits are going to lead to more successful outcomes unless you really understand your purpose.
Yeah.
Purpose is going to drive everything at the end of the day. So, in the military, a habit that's instilled in you is that of physical fitness, especially as a paratrooper. You've got to be willing and able to do everything that every one of your paratroopers is expected to do. These are young men, usually, especially in the 82nd Airborne Division, where I served in combat.
Right.
Many athletes, strong mind, strong-willed, and a strong conviction about their country. And physical fitness is a big piece of that. So you build a habit of really extreme physical fitness at the highest levels in order to lead others, but also to be a good follower, because the leaders expect you to be able to perform. So physical fitness is a habit. So your purpose in that organization is you're on an 18-hour string for the country to go anywhere in the world should they need you. And you have to be ready. Your equipment has to be ready. Your body has to be ready. Your mind has to be ready. And so you build the habits to make sure that those things are in place. And I find that those habits that I built then as a young officer in the military still carry forward today in different ways. I work with a lot of academia. I work with each of the deans, the university leadership. So what habits do I need in order to help make sure I'm value added when I meet with them? So that physical fitness piece may not be as important. Right?
But it sounds like that's still a part of your day.
It's definitely a part of my day. But there's other aspects to it. So am I, well-read? If, let's say, for example, it's Dean Jones and I have a meeting, am I up to date on the latest, Harvard Business Review? Have I reviewed maybe some of the latest thinking in higher education with regard to what the best business programs in the country are doing and executing? What's on the front edge of education in business? And what do executive MBA programs, for example, or finance programs or investment programs, you name it, what's best in class look like? And so I have the ability to put myself in a situation where that's a habit that I have to make sure that I've built into my day-to-day and into my routine. And so that's part of the reason why you'll also see next to my different books, you'll also see The Economist. I read the Financial Times. I've got Foreign Affairs because when I meet with Bush School faculty, I want to be able to talk about, what does the future of the world and how elections globally move into. We want to talk about pandemics. Well, I need to be able to at least understand what these topics are and these things are. So when you ask the question, what habits do you build? You've got to start with the purpose. What is it in your day-to-day that you're expected to do? And what habits are going to make you more valuable to that enterprise, whatever it may be? So for academia, it's a wide swath of different things that I need to be able to have good habits for. Health is always at the center. If you're not healthy physically or mentally, you can't perform in all the other areas. So that ought to be up in your top 3, is taking care of yourself physically and mentally. I would put in there spiritually as well, whatever that is. For some, it's a very specific religion. For some, it's a mindset. It's an attitude about faith and trusting. But whatever that is, you've got to figure that out for yourself. You can't expect somebody else to tell you what that is because nobody else can tell you what your purpose is. You've got to figure that out.
Perfect. We normally dig into our background discussion by saying, give us 60 seconds on your road to Mays or Texas A&M. But for you, let's take a few minutes. You have ties to this institution going back centuries in a very literal sense. Tell us about your family's history and your history here.
Great. So my history at Texas A&M is unique.
Yes.
And it started with the very first Voelkel who attended Texas A&M, and it was 1881. And he ended up leaving to go work in the cotton fields and everything. But I do have a copy of his transcript, and it's quite interesting because it's got mathematics and it's got, geography and English and these other things. And it's signed by the president of the university at the time because it was tiny. And he didn't have the best math grades either. So that was good. But Texas has been a part of the Voelkel family because that's where the Voelkels immigrated to and started a life. German roots, immigrated into Shelby, Texas, Round Top, Carmine, that area.
Sure.
Farmers, and believed in education. Hence, as many Voelkels as possible went to college, and some with great success, some without. It's a great American story. Some became entrepreneurs, some farmed. And my grandfather, class of 1935, and his two brothers were all here at the same time. Very interesting times. The other piece was the idea that service to the country was important, and it meant service at the state, and federal level if called upon, and then also in the local community. And so the family has always had somebody involved somehow locally in giving back. My father, class of 1964, did it differently. He didn't do it in the military. He worked for the United States Agency for International Development. So he traveled the world helping in other countries with agriculture. Met my mother overseas. They fell in love, got married, and here comes me and my two little brothers. We've all served in the military, all in the Corps of Cadets at Texas A&M, all in the Aggie Band.
We'll come back to that.
And all served in the infantry and overseas. And all of us love A&M, and our spouses also went to Texas A&M. And so this place is very near and dear to all of us for lots and lots and lots of reasons.
What was your first job?
Working at home. So my mother worked and my father worked. Father was a farmer/rancher, and my mother worked for the Brenham State School, which is a school for people in the state who have some mental challenges. And she started at a very entry-level position and worked there for 20 years. And her final role there was helping with the athletics department and Special Olympics. And amazing, amazing experience because she taught us that these people were amazing and created by God and deserved to be loved, and that we had to learn how to communicate in order for them to understand that we were the ones that had the ability to communicate, and therefore it was our responsibility to reach them. And it wasn't their fault. She said, God loves them and nobody should ever take advantage of these young people.
Right.
And so I vividly remember going as a high school student to these dances that they used to have. And Mom, and sometimes my brothers and I were the only boys there, and dancing with, at the time they called them clients. And very meaningful because bringing joy to their lives and just being normal for a few minutes impacted us in a big way and taught us that you treat everybody with respect. You treat everybody equally, and you do what you can for others whenever you can. And it can be the smallest thing. It can be greeting somebody, telling them good morning, I hope you have a great day. And you could be the only person that day that greets that person. You could be the only person that day that cares enough to notice them. And that can make all the difference in somebody's life. And we learned that very young there with Mom. She's also the one who pushed us to join the military, join the Corps of Cadets, to be Eagle Scouts and the Boy Scouts and all of the rest of it. Her happiest day was becoming a naturalized citizen of the United States, and I'll never forget that.
You mentioned that they met overseas. Which country?
They met in Kenya, in Africa. And so my mother practices Islam. My father, Christian. Father died a number of years ago. So conversations at the dinner table were always global and always interesting because different perspectives that fed the dialogue. And because we lived overseas so much, we lived in Africa and in Central America and traveled through Europe a good amount. We had a little bit different view on what our role was in other people's lives and what we could do maybe to help. So it's always been in the DNA to do something for others in some way.
Brief tangent. You mentioned that your mother practices Islam, your dad was Christian. Growing up in a religiously blended family impact how you approached not just your adult life, but especially fatherhood.
Oh, perspective.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's literally always two sides to every story, sometimes 3 and 4.
Right.
And the ability to listen and to digest and hear different perspectives and form an opinion, I think has helped us immensely. I'll tell you, for a fact, it helped me in Iraq in combat operations. Because
How so?
Well, because I understood maybe at a different level that vilifying the enemy wasn't the path forward for us, that we needed to find a way to work with the local Iraqi leadership in order to create opportunities for success within the local communities. This is way back now. I mean, this is 2003, 2004, but there was a sense that if you could just capture and kill enough of the terrorists, then everything would be fine.
Yeah, there was this big temptation to otherize at that point in history.
That's right. We always do. I mean, it's easy. You want an enemy. It's easy. Once you've got an enemy, then you know who you're against. But it's very complicated when the people that you think are the enemy are actually not the enemy, but are forced into whatever the situation that they're in due to all the environmental circumstances. Right. And so that's the difficulty of what counterinsurgency, that's the difficulty of counterterrorism and everything else is how do you figure out what's the root cause for the issues in this particular region and what can you do to influence it? And there's blunt trauma, you know, the kinetic fight, bullets and bombs.
Yes.
There's the opposite end of the spectrum, which is there's aid and there's sort of diplomacy. And the soft power. And somewhere in the middle is the right answer. But you've got to bring people along and you've got to get buy-in into whatever that future looks like. So we're back to purpose again. Right? So giving people a purpose that may be alternative to what they thought could be is the real sort of epiphany of my time there. And you'd ask the question, how did growing up in a household that had two different religions expressed influence all that?
Yeah.
It's back to perspective. So my brothers and I, chose to be Christians and went to a Lutheran church and enjoyed all the benefits of that from the standpoint of being in a Christian community and all the rest. But yet our mother was strong and devout enough to where she kept her faith and she encouraged our faith. And she encouraged us to learn as much as we could about all the different religions in the world, different religions, different languages. Again, perspective. When you've got perspective, it's harder to vilify and hate others. When you've got perspective, you also have empathy. When you've got empathy, it's very difficult to have a real ego, right? Because empathy means that you care about others to the point that you're willing to sacrifice and maybe do some things to help others. And so those things all wrap into one and help form who you are as a person.
Sure.
And those things lead to who you are as a leader and your purpose and why you lead the way you lead and why you do the things that you do. And so I think those discussions at the dinner table about religion and politics and life and service helped inform my brother Bo, my brother Trevor, and my opinions about the kind of people we wanted to be and the lives we wanted to live.
Almost everyone thinks that they're wearing the white hat. Not everybody, but most people think that they're on the good side. And when you have a group of people, or even just an individual person, that you disagree with in a profound way, a way that leads to war, for example, figuring out the perspective from which this person who you think of as doing terrible things, that they think that they're on the side of the angels, so to speak, figuring out how they got there can be really instructive in terms of figuring out how to solve the problem beneath the problem.
History matters. History informs the present.
Yeah.
And understanding where you were and how that may have influenced in getting you to where you are is probably step one.
Mm-hmm.
There isn't a problem that you can address that you can just attack from what I know today and just the facts that as I have them presented to me right now.
Right.
You've always got to go back and look at causality. Simon Sinek talks about the why behind the what, right? And quite often it's that why that's so difficult to figure out. And once you've cracked the code on the why, everything else starts to fall into place. And back to the question with regard to growing up in a household with sort of these different religious views. At the end of the day, both religions believe in peace. Both religions believe in the fact that there is a God. Both religions believe that there is a path to salvation. They're different paths, but they're paths nonetheless. So understanding those helps inform your perspective. And when you communicate with somebody from a different religious background or whatnot, when you have that perspective, you're more readily able to listen and use both ears that you've got and one mouth. And I think that's helpful. One really quick example.
Yeah.
So our units were attacked on average about 3 times a day at this during the Iraq War, and this was early on in the fighting.
Yeah.
And they ranged from, gunfire to, mortar attacks or an RPG, a rocket-propelled grenade attack or different things like that. About 3 times per day. And we were doing raids every single night to try to capture all the bad guys. And at the end of the day, we weren't making a big enough dent in that. I held a city council meeting, newly formed city council, had 3 young ladies on the city council, which was new.
Okay.
And just asked their opinions and said, okay, I'm a captain in the 82nd Airborne Division. I'm here and we want to help. We're here to liberate. We're here to lift up, not tear down, contrary to some people's beliefs. Most soldiers don't want war. They want peace. You need a military in order to guarantee peace. It's more of a defensive mechanism, and you only use the offense when you have to.
Right.
Anybody who's actually been in combat and who's fought doesn't ever want to put anybody else through that. And so we're sitting in this council meeting. It's 100 plus degrees Fahrenheit, hot, no air conditioning, no windows in this cinder block building, trying to figure out how to help this sector of 250,000 people in southwestern Baghdad. And the solutions generally were more troops. We need guards on every street corner. We need more police. We need this, we need that. And one of the ladies raised her hand and she said, I just want a place where my children can play in peace. For months they've been in the house and all they see is what's on TV. And all you see on TV is the bad news. We don't have a market to shop in anymore.
Right.
It's difficult to travel. We just want a place where our kids can play. And that brought up the conversation around all the trash that was in so many of the open fields that used to exist in the neighborhoods. And by the end of that afternoon, we'd created a program to clean up trash in these fields in order to have soccer and to allow some markets to open up. Went to the United States Agency for International Development, asked for help. They gave us financial help. We hired 500 Iraqis that first day that we'd opened, paying people $1 per day, giving them hope. We cleaned up the first few fields. By the end of the program, we had 16,000 Iraqis every single day that we were paying. It got up to $5 and then $7 per day per person. And the soccer fields open. The kids started playing soccer. The markets open. The pharmacy opened. Business started to be generated.
Yeah.
People had lives again. Guess what happened to the attacks in the area? They went down to zero, as a matter of fact, for a number of months before they picked back up again. The enemy adapted, and the enemy then started attacking those areas and the cleanup sites.
Right.
So we had to adapt once again.
Kind of reminds me of the redemption of New York City in the 80s and 90s. The first step was getting rid of graffiti
and broken windows.
Yeah.
Yep. So wherever there were broken windows, they made an effort to go put windows back in. And it was those simple tasks in New York that helped people be, number one, proud of their neighborhoods.
Yeah.
Number two, a part of the community.
Yeah.
And then a third piece is that there's security and safety. Without security and safety, you don't have much room in your mind or your soul to fill it with much else.
Yeah, Maslow's hierarchy.
That's right.
Thank you for your service to our country. You had the opportunity to teach at West Point. Tell us a little bit more about that. What did you teach and what ways did you enjoy teaching? What were some of the challenges?
That's a great question. So I'd served 2 tours in Iraq and was still young in my career as far as commanders went. And I had the amazing opportunity to teach leadership and ethics at the United States Military Academy at West Point. Teaching leadership to young men and women who knowingly are going in to serve their country and with almost 100% certainty at that point in time, this is in 2007 and 8, we're going to go into combat operations.
Yeah.
It was one of the most fulfilling roles that I've been able to play in my life, as well as for my wife, Christy, because we hosted a lot of these cadets in our home. And our daughter, Eliana, was only 2 at the time. And so it was a wonderful experience and time for us. It gave me a chance to reflect on what I had learned in combat and what I had learned at Texas A&M in the Corps of Cadets and what I believed about leadership. And so in a very unique way, it was almost a 2-year period where every single day I got to share the best and worst about what it meant to be a leader with young people who were hungry to learn because they knew they were going to be implementing what we taught in just a few months in real life combat situations. So it was an incredible experience from that standpoint. From the standpoint of personal growth, it was a real growth period for me as a leader as well, because I codified all those things I knew in my gut to be true about leadership in the lessons that I taught, but then in also the great questions that the cadets had asked. Really, sometimes gut-wrenching questions, difficult things that you have to grapple with.
What was the hardest question you ever got?
The hardest question I'd ever received was about, was it worth it? Right? Was it worth it risking your life, risking the lives of others, and then probably the hardest, taking other lives, right? I mean, is it worth it? The answer was yes, because the belief in what this country stands for and the belief that helping those who are oppressed, helping set the conditions where freedom can flourish, and helping those that can't help themselves, as nostalgic and utopian as those things sound, I believed in them, and I still do to this day. I think we need, as a people, to believe in those things.
Sure.
I think if you don't believe in those things and you don't think that that's realistic, then we almost lose our purpose.
Yeah.
Right? America is supposed to be this benevolent sort of, you've heard it referenced as the light on the hill, a beacon on a hill, right? Where anybody from anywhere, from any background can come here and become whatever that they want to be. Mm-hmm. America's going to give you a fighting chance where we're all created equal. And I think at our core, especially in the military, my peers and my best friends that still serve today believe that. And as complicated and as hard and as sometimes unclear and ambiguous as things may look in the long arc of history, I think it'll all be viewed as, the right thing to do. So that was the toughest question. And I still grapple with it, though, from time to time, but that was my answer. I hope I answered it for you.
To me, that's the right answer. I mean, not that, you have been far closer to these questions than I have, and I would never presume to tell someone of your stature and experience how to think about this. It seems that a life, or even many lives, are precious things, but not the most precious thing. I think it was in the movie Hoodlum, of all things, where someone asked someone else, have you found nothing so dear that you hold so dear that you would die for it or kill for it? And wrestling with those questions, those are what define our lives, I think. Mm-hmm. I think that's a big piece of what this is all about.
Yeah.
And that's the rock that everything else is built on, the way I see it.
Well, when you look at service in particular, and you'd ask the question, what was the hardest question that a cadet had asked me when I was teaching leadership at West Point? And that question about, was it worth it? Increasing the opportunity for freedom and equality is the driving force behind the Constitution and, protecting our country and everything else. But that other piece, and you just mentioned it, and that is, what would you be willing to lay your life down for? At the end of the day, those paratroopers were willing to lay their lives down first for each other, then for the ideology of this thing called the Constitution. Mm-hmm. There's no more powerful statement than being in a group that's willing to risk it all for each other. And the bonds that are created and the feeling of purpose is so palpable amongst a group like that you can achieve just about the impossible when required. And so that was another piece during our lessons and everything else that we talked about that really came out and provided hope to a lot of these future young lieutenants, because they knew that they were going to go into organizations where that was a mindset and a mentality. So very powerful, and definitely gave me more perspective on life and purpose and the why behind the what.
Talking about perspective a little bit, one of the things that we're trying to push past at Texas A&M is the difficulty of conveying our culture, the outside looking in, inside looking out, all of that business. Can you tell us a little bit about your time in the Corps, in the Aggie Band, the things you liked about that process, what you learned from it, that kind of thing?
So you're asking about my time in the Corps and what I liked. Maybe more important is what I didn't like.
Please, let's get into it.
So first off, it was very difficult. Yeah. I almost didn't make it through my freshman year, academically as well as in the Corps. I was what they call the attitude fish or freshman, right? Because I smiled a lot and laughed a lot. And when you're, being disciplined by upperclassmen for not doing something right, it's usually a bad idea to smile about it or joke. But I looked at it all as a game. And the lessons learned were incredible. First thing is that within the Corps Cadets at A&M, you learn first about yourself and what you value. And those that make it through are able to better lead peers because they understand themselves better. You learn about discipline. And the Aggie Band, if anything, it teaches you discipline like you wouldn't believe, because
I believe
when the band is marching on Kyle Field, there is no room for error. And you don't want to be the person that lets your team down or the band down, right? By making that mistake that causes second and third order mistakes for everybody behind you as you march. And so discipline was core to that. The other piece was that life, if you think about it, is about relationships and friends and having others that you can rely on to get through tough times. And the Corps Cadets teaches you that in great, great, great detail about relying on others. When I taught at West Point, each one of those cadets was hand-selected. They're congressionally nominated, each of the cadets there, and they've got top grades. They're captains of whatever sports teams they have. They're, leaders of their debate teams and all the rest. These young people are incredible. And there's a sense that they have an obligation because they have chosen that as their profession to be the best of the best. And there's an individualistic approach taken early in their education curriculum there. Whereas in the Corps Cadets, you're told, you thank your lucky stars you got here. The person to your left and right are going to be the ones to help you get through. So there's automatically from day one this teamwork aspect of why you're going to be able to make it or not. So I loved it. Wonderful memories in the Corps. Both my younger brothers were also in the Corps, both in the Aggie Band. And all three of us would tell you that it was fundamental to us understanding how to be better leaders of ourselves first and then of others.
You were also the first student regent appointed to the Texas A&M University Board of Regents. In pioneering that position, what surprised you the most about the early parts of the process that you experienced?
So serving as a student regent was really insightful because I got to learn at a very strategic level what higher education does for the state of Texas, its importance to our economy, to our stability as a state, and also to our future through innovation and our ability to stay on the leading edge in so many different areas. So it was very insightful. The budget process, as well as the process of evaluating university presidents and programs, was very insightful for me. Now, I was a graduate student at the time. So, I earned my undergraduate degree in the College of Engineering, went into the service, served for about 12 years, and then before I taught at West Point, earned my master's degree at the Bush School of Government and Public Service. And so I was in the Bush School of Government service as a graduate student, two-tour, combat veteran, baby on the way, graduate student. So I was able to learn so much about the system because I was actually studying international affairs and policy at the Bush School. And I was able to connect dots to what we were doing at the system level as regents to that. And so it was very, very insightful for me. And the other thing that serving on the Board of Regents taught me was the importance of diversity amongst boards and leadership teams, especially when you're solving complex problems. the problems brought to the Board of Regents were never black and white solutions. They were always gray, and they were always complicated in the sense that sometimes there were political issues at play as well. And having a very diverse group around a table, all with a common purpose to do the best job possible for the system and for Texas A&M, was very insightful for me. And everybody's opinion around that table mattered. And I've carried that with me to this day as well, in how I conduct my meetings and how I manage the Texas A&M Foundation.
Mm. Yeah, the case for diversity is very, very clear. And I think it also kind of plays to getting rid of the outside looking in, inside looking out. There's an air of exclusivity to that. And really, I think what we want everybody to say, no, I want to go play with those men and women. I want to play in their game. I want to see how they're doing it. Please come join in with us. Like, be a part of what we're doing here.
So Texas A&M is unique nationally. It's unique globally because at the core of our being as Aggies, but then also as an institution, there's a belief that you can make a difference. And whatever it is that you care about here, there is an opportunity for you to explore that at a deeper level. Mm-hmm. And the idea that you can come from any walk of life to this campus and find your place and find out who you are is enticing.
Sure is.
Our millennial generation and the generation after that are probably some of the most incredible people on the planet, some of the smartest, some of the absolute most talented. And what I've found is that this generation wants to do something meaningful more often than not, while still having a life, while still being able to balance all those wants and needs in life. And A&M provides a great starting block for so many because of that. The other thing I'll say is that this is a university, in my opinion, that is always striving to be elite, but never to be elitist.
I like that.
We're striving to be elite, but never to be elitist. And that's a powerful statement if you think about it.
Sure.
Because at the point that you believe you're elitist and you're looking down your nose at everybody else, you lose the very ability to be who you are.
Right.
You lose what got you there to begin with.
Right.
And I think that's a constant struggle as you look at an organization like this university and our culture and everything else.
People who come from great opportunity, like us, being honest, I think we both come from great privilege in many ways. And we have to acknowledge that and not be ashamed of it. It is what we are. It's what has in part made us who we are. And then we have to use it to help others who have not had the same opportunities. What is the Texas A&M Foundation? What is their mission?
The Texas A&M Foundation is a independent 501c3 whose sole job and purpose is to help Texas A&M University.
Right.
We manage a $2 billion endowment, have 160 full-time team members, and we not only help translate what the university needs to donors, we also help create opportunities for Texas A&M that wouldn't necessarily exist if we didn't exist. The foundation was founded in 1953 off of an idea and about $100. And it's grown now to over $2 billion. Our actual assets under management is right at $2.4 billion. And I lead the team that manages and invests that money, as well as raises the money through philanthropy for the university.
Okay. What's the best story you have about how funding impacted, for example, the university mission?
So the A&M Foundation's mission is philanthropy for the benefit of the university. That takes many, many shapes and forms.
Sure.
Some quick numbers for you. We're in a $4 billion campaign. When it was launched in 2015, it was the third largest campaign of its kind for a public university in the country.
Right.
The largest of its kind in the state of Texas, and it still holds that distinction, $4 billion. When I arrived, we needed to raise a little over $1.2 million every day, 365 days a year, in order to hit that goal.
Right.
I'm proud to announce that we're at $3.7 billion.
Nice.
And we will achieve our goal a little bit ahead of schedule next summer. The $4 billion number for me isn't as important as the idea behind what that $4 billion does. The campaign's called Lead by Example. Lead by Example. What does it mean to lead by example at Texas A&M? Every faculty member, every researcher, every staff member of this great campus of ours is here for a reason. And the beauty of my job and what I get to do is I get to be a part of every single person's life if they want us to be. If they've got a project that's big enough and an idea that's bold enough and they've got a way that they think they can impact the world, then we want to hear about it. And we want to go out and find people that will fund that idea for them. When you ask about impactful stories, I could give you stories about faculty members who wouldn't have been able to do the research that they've conducted without philanthropy. I can tell you about students that wouldn't be on campus if it weren't for our philanthropy. I can tell you about donors whose lives have been impacted and changed for the better because of the philanthropy of investing in Texas A&M University. Both corporations, individuals, and then also private foundations. So there's this entire ecosystem of goodwill that comes out of the work that we do. But if I were to sum up in one quick story, I'll share one from a scholarship recipient who I had the pleasure of meeting a few weeks ago. This young lady sitting at a dinner table, awkwardly eating her dinner, and I meet her and some of her peers for this scholarship.
Yeah.
And introduce myself, and I'm just listening to everybody's stories. Where are you from? What do you do? And this young lady tells me wants to make better pacemakers for, pediatrics. And automatically I'm on the front of my seat because Christy and I had a daughter named Lily who happened to have a pacemaker, who happened to have multiple open heart surgeries. And to meet a young person that's studying and wants to help those kiddos just intrigued me. But here's what's more intriguing. I asked her about the scholarship that she'd received. And this is a Terry Scholar. And she says, I'll never forget the day that I went to interview for the scholarship. And she starts to tell me the story. And then she's asked to come on stage to talk to the group. So I turn my chair around and I'm watching her on stage. And she gets up there and she has her speech prepared.
Okay.
She tells the group of about 300 people in the room, I've worked on this speech for so long, but I'm just going to speak from my heart. She says, when my mother and I pulled into that parking lot to interview for this scholarship, I felt like I was a queen. I felt like I was somebody that could just do anything in the world. We'd driven quite a ways. It was hot. My mother prayed for me in Spanish. She says the prayer. It's really meaningful when you hear her tell the story. And she said, then a few other cars pulled up. And everybody was dressed better than me. And she said, I started to feel small. I started to feel like my thrift shop blouse didn't fit quite right. My skirt wasn't right. My shoes weren't good enough. And I didn't want to walk in and do the interview because people like me didn't belong in college. She says, my mother prayed for me again. And she said, honey, you go in there. You're going to change our family's life. She gets the courage up. She goes in to do the interview. She says, I put on my fake mask, the mask a lot of my people put on to pretend that we belong and that everything's okay and we're like everybody else. And I bombed the interview. She tells the audience, and everybody laughs. She says, I bombed the interview. And I just couldn't get over the fact that I didn't feel like I belonged. That I belonged with my father working in the fields, picking vegetables, or maybe with my mother cleaning houses. And that's where my people belong. The interviewers ask her the last question, and they say, what would this scholarship mean to you at Texas A&M? And she says, I couldn't breathe. I couldn't speak. I cried because it would mean everything. Everything. She walks out of the interview assuming she didn't get it. She goes back to the car. She cries with her mother. Her mother prays with her again. Says, it's okay. We're going to be fine. There's another opportunity. She says, no, Mom, I'm going to work with you. We're going to have a great life. 2 weeks later, she gets a letter from the Terry Foundation that she's going to be at Texas A&M University on a full ride scholarship. And it's changed her life and the life of her family. And that's what the Texas A&M Foundation exists for.
Thanks for sharing that. I want to ask about something that's very personal to you. You mentioned your daughter Lily. Can you talk with us just briefly about that story and how it's impacted you?
I wouldn't be sitting here today if it weren't for sweet Lily Korinne Voelkel. We knew she would have heart complications before she was born. We met with specialists before she was born to talk about what our path forward was going to be. We knew she'd have open heart surgery when she was 6 days old and not even 6 pounds. And we were ready for that.
Yeah.
We were going to tackle that together as a family. What we weren't prepared for was that she had this syndrome that wasn't identified for 4 months after she was born. And the syndrome's charge, right, and it affects your cranial nerves during their development. She was deaf and blind, as well as had other complications. And so we had to learn how to communicate with her on her terms. And by her 3rd year, she was able to do certain signs in our palms of our hands and all the rest. Her brain was fine, which was beautiful. It was just her body that was not functioning the way it was supposed to. There came a point where we had 15 different specialists, and each specialist had their own little unique area where they thought they could fix different pieces of sweet Lily. And it culminated in a meeting one day. It was very difficult to get all the specialists in the room at the same time. Each specialist is a leader in their field. Each specialist believes they've got the right answer. And taking a look at a child holistically and not just as a bag of symptoms, if you will, was a real struggle because of the system, right, because of the medical system.
Yeah.
So you have to have very strong advocates for these children. Christy had the day shift, so she was there all day, and I did the night shift, and I would stay in the hospital at night. I had my Army cot, and I would sleep on my cot. I was still active duty at the time in the United States Army Reserves, and we made it work. But we made a decision at one point that quality of life was more important than quantity of life. No more surgeries, no more interventions. And one of the toughest decisions we'd ever had to make. But boy, for about 6 months, Lily lived. We took her to the beach, and we did everything that we thought she would want us to do on a bucket list. When she passed away, it wasn't because of her heart or her stomach or any of those things. She developed a bacteria that was resistant to any antibiotics that existed. And so it was tough calling hospice and knowing that we would hold her in her last breaths, but we did it on our terms. We did it in our home, on her favorite couch, and sat there and held her. We told her we loved her, and she took her last breaths. And my wife and I promised each other that whatever it was that we were going to do in our lives, that we would try to give back to others from that. And when we had her funeral, we received a phone call, and it was the most unusual thing because we had our whole family in our kitchen. And my phone came up with an unknown number. I mean, and who answers unknown numbers nowadays, right? Nobody. You just decline. Well, I answered it, and thank God I did, because it was the aide for the former president of the United States, our 41st president, George Bush. And he and Barbara had heard about Lily's passing. I had served on his advisory board, and in my reserve job, as another ultimate irony, my role was to work on his funeral plan. So we knew each other. And that we could do a whole nother podcast on that. But he gets on the phone and he tells us that he's sorry to hear about Lily passing, and that, he and Mrs. Bush knew the feeling. And it was a terrible feeling because they'd lost their daughter, Robin, as well, when she was about the same age. Robin was actually 4. And he said, "You're never going to fill the hole that's going to be in your heart. You're going to think about her every day." And we do. But he said, if you can fill that hole by doing good for others and service, and you take her story and you help other people through that pain, she will have served her purpose.
and you and Christy will have a life that's well lived. And so that's what we try to do.
Then I guess the only question that can follow that is, how do you do that?
Yeah, it's not easy. Our marriage struggled for a while. Our faith, we questioned our faith. Why God? Why us? Why this? Why this sweet child? In the pediatric intensive care unit at Memorial Hermann Hospital, you see some of the toughest cases, drownings, parents who leave their kids in the car seat in the summer, in the car, on accident, horrible things.
Yeah.
And what you gain is an appreciation for life, and you gain an appreciation for what we do have, and you don't take as many things for granted. But it took us a while. I'd left the active duty just before Lily had passed away and went into the private sector and went into family office work where we had a bunch of portfolio companies, and the CEO and founder gentleman was an absolute genius. He just sent me into different companies that he had to help fix things and do different things, and it was very rewarding. My way of grieving was different than my wife. I poured myself into work. I tried to forget about everything, compartmentalize, and just move on. And Christy was sad and depressed and wanted to talk about everything. And so for a while, it took us a while to get through all that. Life is going to throw you curveballs, right? Life is going to give you some things that you could never imagine are going to happen. The true test of your character and of who you are is how you respond to those things. Do you succumb to those things? Does it bring you down? It's okay if it brings you down for a little while, but not forever. You have to find a way to pick yourself back up. For some, it's faith. For some, it's their family. For some, it's friends that they've got. All three of those require a purpose that's bigger than what you may realize that you're here for. And that's where I think for Christy and I, we realized we weren't happy unless we were helping others and felt like we were doing good in some capacity for other people and using those skills, for that. So it's a struggle every day. We think about it here on campus. We have some scholarships in her name, and I'm always looking for opportunities to speak to student groups about this. And it's the worst feeling to lose a child, but if you share the story and you try to do good, I feel like I'm doing right by Lily, and Christy does too.
I'm going to ask some rapid fire questions. It's our traditional format. What do you think is people's biggest misconception of you?
That it's easy, or that it comes naturally.
Yeah.
I work very hard. I do say things like nobody's shooting at us, our best days are yet to come, because I actually believe that there's not a problem on campus that we can't figure out how to solve. We've got the smartest people in the universe on this campus. It shouldn't be this hard to get things done. Let's get through it, and nobody's shooting at us.
Yeah.
So I work hard. I get up very early. I go to bed late. I don't recommend that for everybody. It works for me. And I truly care deeply about people. And so I spread myself too thin sometimes. But it sure brings me a lot of comfort and joy at night when I lay my head on the pillow that I'm doing something good. But it's not easy. It's work. I think when you have a calling, the joys that come from it they kind of pour out naturally. And finding that balance can be hard, but it's worth it. I would challenge everybody, take the hardest assignments and the toughest jobs you can while you're young. Learn who you are, learn what you like and you don't like. Do the tough jobs. You can amaze yourself at what you can accomplish and what you can do when you surround yourself with great people.
We close each session with Good Bull. Do you have anyone that you would like to send some Good Bull?
Some Good Bull, specifically in Mays, I would totally have some Good Bull for retired Lieutenant General John Van Alstyne and for Ben Welsh. Both those gentlemen, almost every week I hear from a student or somebody who's been impacted or touched by their lives. And I would love to send some Good Bull their way. Both of those gentlemen have a purpose. Both of those gentlemen have been through a lot and believe in the students and the faculty and the staff, and they believe in the culture that we've got here at Texas A&M and within Mays. And I believe that Dean Jones and the team that's assembled here is incredible, and the best days are yet to come.
And nobody's shooting at us.
And nobody's shooting at us. Yep.
Tyson, thank you for sharing your story with us.
You're welcome. I'm happy to do it, and thank you for what you're doing.
We appreciate Tyson and the insights he offered in the show. For our MasterCast top 3 takeaway, I want to start with the most challenging question he said he got from a cadet at West Point. And the question was it worth it? And I think that's a profound question in a lot of ways for us to ask about a lot of things.
Mm-hmm.
One of your responses, at first, I kind of froze and thought, oh no, that does not sound like a good response. And then after thinking about it for a few minutes, I thought, no, that is probably one of the best responses when you said lives are precious.
And it was a life or many lives.
Yeah. But that lives are precious, but that they may not be the most precious thing.
Mm-hmm.
That there are things that we would be willing to die for. Someone else's life was what he said first. The paratroopers, I believe, is what he said.
Right.
They were willing to die for each other first.
Right.
And then for the ideology of the country.
Right.
And that there may be other things that are more important than our life if we really think about what's important to us.
Unquestionably.
Yeah. But when you said that at first, I thought, no, life is the most precious thing.
It really depends on how you phrase the sentence, because if you say life as a whole, is that more precious than everything else? Maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah, it might be. But if you think of it in the context of my life, for example, or, the lives of a community, for example, I think that there are things unquestionably that are more important to me than my life. Mm. And should those things be threatened, there are things that are more important to me than the lives of those who would threaten them as well. And I think that in the name of preserving life as a whole, in the way that we feel like it is best lived, I guess, I'm not sure exactly how to phrase it, but protecting the things that are in life that we love, it is sometimes we have to be willing to sacrifice both our own lives and, if it should come to it, the lives of others as well.
So to me, that all relates to that question of, was it worth it? Or would you go back and change something that doesn't feel worth it anymore? Yeah.
It strikes me that usually the answer to those things, was it worth it? Was it enough? That sort of thing. Life seems best when you're living in such a way that the answer to those questions is almost always yes. And the only time you really feel regret about things are when you either acted in a way that you felt like was dishonest in some way and tried to get away with something, or you acted too quickly in a time of stress and you hurt someone because of it or hurt yourself because of it, or you acted without all of the information that you reasonably could have had. And those are the times that you end up with real regrets, when you're dishonest, when you act too quickly, or when you act without enough information. But the rest of the time, if you're doing your best and making the best decisions you know how to make, you may end up taking gambles that don't work out. Goodness knows I've had a lot of those. But do I regret any of that? No, right. Not at all. And without big swings, you never hit any home runs.
The acting without enough information is an interesting one that brings me to the second of our top 3 takeaways.
Look at that transition, Kyle.
In that we operate without all the information 100% of the time.
Yep.
And Tyson talked about how in one way, cleaning up the soccer fields during the Iraq War felt like a major victory because it cut down the attacks for a short period of time, cut them down to 0. But that in hindsight, there were things they hadn't thought about because they didn't have all the information. Not that they should have necessarily, but they didn't at that point.
Right.
One of my husband's Sunday school teachers growing up was Charlie Wilson. And
of Charlie Wilson's War?
Yes, of Charlie Wilson's War. He had a lot of really interesting Sunday school teachers. That was not the only famous one. But
Mr. Rogers was another one.
Yes. But Ryan and I watched Charlie Wilson's War together.
Right.
And it was interesting because there's some blame attributed to Charlie Wilson for supporting the people of Afghanistan with arms and money and things like that to fight Russia.
Yeah.
And how that later backfired.
Yes.
And Charlie would talk about those kinds of things. And it's interesting how complex that is and how complex all of life is and the intersections of all of the decisions that we make, or the butterfly effect, that
exactly what I was thinking of.
Even small things can have major consequences, but that major decisions like that, cleaning up the soccer fields is a noble, thoughtful solution. Even you could say a simple solution to a complex problem.
And an insightful solution too.
Absolutely. That had some serious ramifications. How do you anticipate those things? And you can't live your life worried those things might happen, right?
No.
You do the best you can with the information that you have.
And that's how you can go on with a clear conscience, even when those mistakes, I'm using air quotes here, even when those perhaps missteps cost lives. You did the best you could, and you did something that you thought of as really good and really helpful and really impactful, and it had a cost, a serious, serious cost.
And again, we also don't know what the cost would have been had they not done that.
True.
It could have had a cost that was lesser than
Completely true.
the cost of not doing it.
Right.
For our last takeaway, I really liked what Tyson talked about with meditation and how it helps him determine what needs a response. And I thought, oh, that's a really good insight, that if that could be the goal of meditation, that seems important.
Yeah.
What even needs a response and what just doesn't.
Right.
You asked in follow-up to that about habit.
Yeah.
And he talked a little bit about the importance of habit. And it struck me that there is such a need for habit so that we don't have to make as many decisions in our day. There's a lot of research out there on decision fatigue.
Yes.
Even in things like choosing what to wear in a day, basically you have a finite amount of decisions you can make effectively in a day.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And I may be misquoting the research a little bit, but that's how I interpret it. You have a finite amount of decisions you can effectively make in a day, and deciding what to wear in the morning is one of your decisions, right? It counts as one of your decisions. So a lot of really well-known leaders wear the same thing every day. They wear a work uniform. Obama wore a work uniform in the same suit. Steve Jobs wore a black turtleneck sweater as a work uniform and I think Mark Zuckerberg does the same thing with a certain t-shirt. So you don't have to decide what you're going to wear every day. Same thing with what you're going to eat every day. There's people who eat the same thing, at least for breakfast and lunch, because you don't have to decide what you're going to eat every day. So you're combating decision fatigue. And it occurred to me that creating habits helps you to combat decision fatigue. You don't have to decide that you're going to get up and work out that day because that's something you do every day. Or you don't have to decide that you're going to write every morning because that's something that you do every morning. You don't have to decide that you are going to meditate every morning because that's just a habit that you do every day.
Sure.
Tyson talked about being thoughtful about those habits and how developing habits is important, but that thinking about what habits are going to lead you to the results that you want is the most important. What are the habits that are going to make you more valuable to your organization, to your community, to your family? What are the habits? Being intentional about those habits, not just habits for the sake of habits or habits because you've done it for the last 30 years or the last 28 days or whatever it takes to develop a habit, but that you're intentional about those habits because they're going to result in something.
And let me bring this a little bit back around. The idea of looking at your life regularly and thinking about the things that you maybe don't like as much about your life in terms of the habits that could solve those problems. So when you're thinking about disrupting, to quote our friend Chris Field, disrupting for good or disrupting for a life that is more what you want, oftentimes it can be helpful to think about that disruption in terms of not what giant revolutionary change can I make in my life, but what tiny incremental change can I make in my life and do that every single day. Habit is a huge one. And the power of resolutions, not for, I'm going to turn my life around backwards, but I'm going to do this one thing for 5 minutes every day in a slightly different way. And that is what leads, in my opinion, leads to real change.
I agree. We, at the Wakanzi Teaching Conference, I've talked about a couple of times on the show, every year we write goals for ourselves.
Yeah.
And it's so powerful. It's ridiculously powerful, in fact, because you think it's so simple, and yet I feel accountable to those goals. And it's usually smaller things. One year it was work outside for 1 hour a day was a goal, because being outside makes me happy. And so I know it doesn't really make you happy, but being outside makes me happy. And so I should be outside more often.
Right. It makes a lot of people happy.
Yeah,
I'm just not one of them.
Sure, because you're so weird. But for the normal people,
Cheers, Kyle.
for the normal people in the world, I want to be outside. So that was a goal for that year. Or, bigger goals, write a book, start a business. Those are goals I set. And it's not tomorrow start a business. I remember I was doing a Bible study, and it was, what is the next step that you can take? What is the next thing? Yeah. And for me, it was buying a personal laptop. I had work laptops that I couldn't work on a business on or write an outside book on. So the next step was buy a laptop. And then I didn't do a lot after that. And then I did things that now I'm writing a book and starting a business. And so what are it's like you said, those little things that you can do, because the whole of it feels so overwhelming, but the little steps, the little things are totally manageable to do.
I want to read your book when you're done with it.
You're welcome to. I would love for you to.
Thanks.
It would be an honor. Before you close us in a quote, I just want to send some good bull real quick.
Sure.
I don't post on Facebook, and I feel a little guilty not posting some of these things on Facebook, but I'm going to say it here. We had a house fire last week. It was a rough week. And the way I would describe it is that our attic burned down. So our house is still mostly standing, but the attic is not in good shape. And so lots of good bull to give out, because as horrible and dramatic and somewhat traumatic as the experience was, there is a lot of good about it. And the times that I've gotten emotional about it have not been about losing things or not being able to live in our house. Those things have not made me emotional. It's been the kindness of people that has made me emotional. So first, to my husband, who spent some time trying to put out the fire, and that was difficult and was not able to, because it didn't respond to that kind of fire extinguisher. The fire extinguisher that you have in your home, it just didn't respond to that kind. I don't know enough about fires, but ultimately the firefighters had to use a different kind of fire extinguisher and then water. But the first person to come to our house, so we live outside of the city, so everyone that came to our house to fight the fire was a volunteer firefighter, which is incredible that people would dedicate their time and risk their lives for others, which is a theme of the show today for sure. But the first person that came, there was a big fire in Bryan, and so a lot of trucks were being deployed to that. And it was actually our neighbor, who is a volunteer firefighter, and also, I believe, the assistant fire marshal for the city. But that day he was a volunteer firefighter, and he was leaving his house, and to get out of our neighborhood, he would turn right. He was leaving his house to go to the fire in Bryan, and he got the call from our house, and he said, I can't turn right. I have to turn left and go help my neighbors. And he did. He turned left and came to our house, and he was there long before another truck was there, and went in the house without any gear on, went up, tried to fight the fire again with the same kind of fire extinguisher, and that didn't work. And then with a different type of fire extinguisher and contain the fire. And then 2 women, I feel like that's very apt, showed up a little bit later and brought the water up. They were really proud that they brought the water up, and I was really proud that they brought the water up. I wished that my nieces were there to watch these amazing women.
Strong women.
Bring this water up.
Making it happen.
Yeah, and saving our house. So that was amazing. Red Cross showed up a couple of hours later. And again, that people would volunteer their time to help people, they said, on the worst day of their life, like Captain Paul did about Salvation Army.
Sure.
And they were there with us. They were partially just there with us, but they asked us a lot of questions that we didn't know to think about. Like, is your medicine okay? Do you have a place to stay tonight? They gave us a gift card for $500, which we will eventually donate back to the American Red Cross. But to have that when we weren't sure if we were going to be able to access our wallets was very comforting.
Sure.
And just them being there, asking us questions, giving us support and help that we needed. They've followed up multiple times since then. They have a crisis counselor that will call you. It just is amazing, all of these people dedicating their time as volunteers to help someone. It was very moving. And I'm sure there's more people that our insurance company is Travelers, not to plug without a sponsor, but they've been remarkable. Just again, the kindness of people that they have to, whether they're having a good day or a bad day, they have to be as kind and considerate and thoughtful as possible with every single phone call because someone on the other end is having a bad day.
Sure.
And it's amazing. It's a different level of customer service that I'm not sure I could deliver on a daily basis. I should probably say I'm sure I could not deliver on a daily basis.
Yeah, I think I would have a hard time with that too.
So I'm grateful for all of those people who helped us.
Good bull to them.
You want to close this with a quote?
I would love to. After a while, you learn the subtle difference between holding a hand and chaining a soul, and you learn that love doesn't mean leaning and company doesn't mean security. You begin to learn that kisses aren't contracts and presents aren't promises, and you begin to accept your defeats with your head up and your eyes open, with the grace of an adult, not the grief of a child. And you learn to build all your roads on today, because tomorrow's ground is often too uncertain for plans. After a while, you learn that even sunshine burns if you get too much. So plant your own garden and decorate your own soul instead of waiting on someone to bring you flowers. And you can learn that you really can endure, that you really are strong, and that you really do have worth. Unknown.